Okay, so I've given all the models a wash in warm water and detergent and a gentle brush with a toothbrush. Although the manufacturers, Wartime's Journal, they actually do clean the models before sending them out, but they recommend that you clean them in detergent again. And then I've coated them all with a spray primer, a grey primer, and that's brought the detail on them out even more. I am just, as I said before, I am just so impressed by these models, and I've laid them out now. These ones at the back are the Spanish squadron, and then the American force was composed of two separate squadrons, an Atlantic squadron here and what they called a flying squadron here. So there was one admiral on the Spanish side at the Battle of Santiago de Cuba. His name was Cervera, I believe, and then the Atlantic squadron was commanded by Admiral Sampson and the flying squadron by Admiral Schley. Right, now what I really want to do is show you the ships in close up, to give you a better idea of the detail on them. The Spanish squadron's composed primarily of three sister ships, so these three ships here are all the same class of ship. So this is the Infanta Maria Teresa, and her sister ships are the Vizcaya, and the one at the back is the Almirante Arquendo. So these are all armoured cruisers. The only other ship, armoured cruiser they have is the Cristobal Colon, Christopher Columbus, and interestingly, Wartime's Journal have modelled it without its main guns at the front and the back there, and it was actually sunk at the back. All the ships were sunk all the Spanish ships ended up being run aground or sunk at the battle. So that is historically accurate, I suppose. But it did have dummy guns in, so whether they should really have portrayed it with guns, I don't know. But anyway, there we go. And then they've also got two torpedo boats, which were called the Pluton and the Furor. These ships were actually built in Clydebank, I think about 1896, so 2 years before the battle. So I've got two models to represent those. And then the American ships, the Atlantic Squadron, there is the New York. I think what I'll do in a minute is put each of these ships down and zoom in on them on the table to give you a better look at them. The Iowa, which is the first one I got out of the packaging the other day. And then there are three ships, two in this squadron and one in the flying squadron, that are all sister ships. The Indiana, and then there's also two ships the same, the Oregon and the Massachusetts. And in the flying squadron, I really like this ship. This is the Brooklyn, which is an armoured cruiser. I'm always attracted to ships with this tumble home on them. This one, the Tsarevich, which is another ship with the tumble home, Russian ship, was actually built in France, and it tends to be a French characteristic, but this one is actually built at Cramp's yard in America, so it is an American construction. And then there's the Texas, which is another armoured cruiser, and the same class of Massachusetts, which is the class of ships that I showed you a moment ago. So I think what I'll do is just try and zoom in and then put a couple of ships right under the spotlight, try and get it to focus. There we go. I mean, just look at the detail on that. My favourite one there, Brooklyn. I don't think it wants to focus any better on. Oh, there we go. And the way the plastic has been taken advantage of in order to give you really crisp detail with no overhangs or anything like that. Best example I can find of that. Try and put this class of ship on its. Oh right, well here we go. The which one was that? This is the Texas. Look at the way the upper deck is completely clear. You can see right through. So these are 1/1500th scale. And the table size I'm going to use them on is 6 foot by 4, and that's fine. It does mean though, with the rules I'm using, Sea Creek 5, you don't use. It's the same as in a war game really. That you don't necessarily have ranges and movement rates that are compatible with the size of the figure you're using, and the same goes for naval wargaming. That you basically choose the model ships that you want, the scale of ships you want, but then you have to restrict your scale of movement and firing ranges to the table size that you're going to use. So Sea Creek 5 is really based on a 1/18,000th scale. So to give you an idea here, these are a set of custom-made movement and turning templates based on a 2-minute turn in 1/18,000th scale. So a ship like the I forget what I said that was. The New York has a range, I think, of about 26 inches in 1/18,000th scale. So on a 6 foot by 4 table, that gives you plenty of room to manoeuvre and make it look realistic, without the ship models being too oversized for the range that you're playing with. So the next thing to do is I've got to put them onto bases. So what I tend to do is put them on plastic card like this, something like this, cut them out to just about fit. Most of the models, I think the widest is just under 2 centimetres wide, so I'll put them on plastic card. The size of the base doesn't really matter, because you measure ranges and so on from front funnel to front funnel, so the base size itself won't matter. And then I mould the base with a little bit of something like polyfiller, something like that, make it look rippled and give the give it a wave appearance, a bit of a bow wake maybe, or some disturbance at the stern to make it look as though the ship's in motion. And from then I'll paint them. So, as I said earlier, I don't know how long it's going to take me to do. I tend to put my projects on boards like this, and I've currently now got 10 on the go, 10 different projects, but I can see myself getting absorbed in these and giving them a bit of priority and putting some of my other work to one side for the time being. So I'll give you an update a little bit later. Thanks for watching. Right, so here we are, the painted result, and I'm quite pleased with the way they turned out. The detail made it quite easy to paint them, and my painting standard isn't brilliant, but I think they look pretty acceptable. So there are different colour schemes for the two fleets. Starting with the Spanish fleet, these are the 3 ships that are all identical, they're sister ships. So they're going to represent the Infanta Maria Teresa, the Almirante Oquendo and the Vizcaya. And then there's the Cristobal Colon, which is the ship that was sent over without its 10-inch guns. In fact, I've been reading up a little bit on the battle, and what actually happened, this is a Giuseppe Garibaldi class cruiser, Italian ship, and the Spanish weren't happy with the 10-inch guns on it, so declined them, and it still hadn't been equipped with guns by the time that the war broke out. But this is the same ship as 2 Japanese ships that fought in the Russo-Japanese War a couple of years later, 6 years later, the Nishin and the Kasuga. And then at the back here there are 2 torpedo boats, the Pluton and the Furor, and the paint scheme for the Spanish, often during a war ships would be painted grey, but by all accounts the Spanish didn't get around to that, and the War Times Journal website recommends that you paint them with black hulls and white upperworks, but with ochre funnels. But in fact, I have found some pictures on the web that show the Vizcaya in particular, not only with ochre funnels, but with ochre roofs to the gun turrets, and the you may not be able to see them there, but the intakes, sort of pipe-shaped intakes that carry air down to the lower decks in ochre as well. So there's also, as well as that illustration that I found, there is a contemporary black and white film of the Vizcaya visiting New York Harbour just shortly before the war broke out, and I'll try and overlay a little bit of that video over this video, because it quite clearly shows that the gun turret roofs were indeed the same shade of grey as the funnels on this black and white film, which would suggest that they were in ochre as well. But I'll give you a little bit closer view of these all in a moment. It's really just to talk about the way I painted them. The same website, the War Times Journal website, suggests that you paint the smaller vessels entirely white with ochre funnels. So all I've done differently from that is to paint the air intakes ochre as well. But I have seen some illustrations that show the torpedo vessels with black hulls, but I'm happy with them as white. But as for the American fleet, they Normally American vessels were white and looked really splendid, but they were all painted grey for the war. So for those I've used the suggested paint from the Wartimes Journal website, Vallejo model colour, medium sea grey, which is 70870, and because there was so much detail on them, I was able to give them quite a nice wash, and then dry brush the same grey over them again, so it's given them a little bit of depth. And I've left the ship's boats on all the vessels as white still, just so that you can see there's a little bit, makes it just a little bit more interesting. What else? Right, the examples in the gallery on the Wartimes Journal site don't have any of these ships, but they do have some Russo-Japanese War ones that are painted. And they have used an old Citadel colour called Bleached Bone for the decks, and to my eye there are a couple of things that just don't look quite right about that. One is that it's a very light colour, but the other is that there's no indication of planking on the decks. And I was a little bit of a quandary about that, because I know the Japanese ships at one stage or another did surface their decks with a sort of linoleum, but I don't think that was the case for the American and Spanish navies at this time. So I wanted to sort of paint them so that they did have some kind of suggestion of planking on them. And in particular, that was certainly the case for the Spanish ships, because the decks did catch fire on a lot of these ships during the battle. But I've done it quite crudely. What I've done is painted the decks a sort of base colour of Wargame's Foundry Spear Shaft Shade, which is sort of fairly dark brown colour. And then I've used a Howard Hughes deck plank and just painted across the decks in a sort of longitudinal direction to give a kind of an impression of planking on the decks. But obviously it's way out of scale, because a human being in this scale would only be about 1 millimetre high, so that means that the gaps between these planks alone is something like 2 or 3 feet. So it's just basically to give a very crude impression of planking, and I'm quite happy with it. And in fact, what I also did, because these two colours do contrast quite a lot, I've actually suppressed the contrast by having a play around with some new paints that I've got bought recently, which are a range of paints from Warcolour. And these guys are based over in Greece, no, Cyprus. I think they're based on Cyprus. And these particular colours, they do a massive amount of range of paints, but these particular colours are transparent. And what I did was I mixed up these 3 colours, brown, yellow and white transparent, to get a very sort of pale yellowish brown. And then I painted that over the decks, over the top of the spear shaft and deck plank colours, and it's kind of, it's probably not something that is easy to show on here, but it has sort of subdued the colours a little bit, so that you don't see the stripiness of the decks, as it were, and I think that worked quite well. And the other thing I found was really, I experimented was I used this white transparent and a turquoise transparent for the actual sea colour of the bases. So I painted the bases originally with a Humbrol Humbrol acrylic number 77, which is navy blue, and that is a very kind of dark blue grey. And normally with my models I would then colour them up with shades of grey, but what I wanted, because this battle was fought in the Caribbean, I wanted to give it a little bit more of a sort of colourful look to the sea. So I painted, on top of the navy blue, I painted turquoise 3 for watercolour. This isn't a transparent paint. So on top of that I then covered the whole base with turquoise transparent, and that has kind of hidden the turquoise colour. It's just enough of a suggestion of it. You can see the colour there. It would really stand out if I just had it there plain. So that worked quite well, and then I used the transparent white to give me the effect of the bow wakes and the sort of disturbance at the stern, and I'm definitely going to do that again, because it sort of leaves that kind of foamy impression of a wake without it standing out too much. In the past I've used a sort of Vallejo silver grey colour, and you have to be very careful how you paint that on, because it really looks over stripy if you lay it on too thick. But with the transparent you have to really kind of build it up in order to get the impression of a wake at all, and I'm very happy the way that's turned out. Let's show you on this one as well. There we go. And the only other thing I tried, and I wasn't too pleased about, was I used a sort of soot effect at the top of the funnels, and in some of them it's worked better on some than others, but I didn't want them to be pristine, so it's given them a sort of dirty look. So there we go. They look good, I reckon. I'll give you some pictures of them a little bit zoomed in a moment, but next thing is to play the battle. Right, so just a slightly closer look to finish off this part of the film. So there are 3 identical vessels there: the Infanta Maria Teresa, the Almirante Oquendo, and the Vizcaya. Then there's the Cristobal Colon without its guns, and then 2 torpedo boats, Pluton and Furor. And then on the American side there's the Atlantic Squadron. At the back there, that's the Iowa. Sorry, trying to figure out that one there. And then the New York, which was Admiral Sampson's flagship. And then 2 ships of the same class, the Oregon and the Indiana. And then in the flying squadron you've got Admiral Schley's ship, the Brooklyn, which as I said before, I love that ship. Let's tumble home. It's full of character, I think. And then behind that there's another ship in the same class as those 2 ships. This one is the Massachusetts, and following up at the rear there is the Texas. And I've just received delivery today of a new battle mat, which I'm really pleased with. So I think they're going to make quite an impressive sight, all these ships on that nice battle mat. So on to the battle.